Welcome to the Early Edge NFL Player Prop Show, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I am your host, Eric Cohen, otherwise known as EC. Glad to have you with us here on a Friday afternoon or whenever you are listening to us this weekend. So the last few weeks, it has not been the best in terms of results on this program. And we're being honest, we're very transparent on the show. Let's bring up the recap screen from last week. I had a 3-1, Dave 2-3, Proppy 2-2. On the year, if we're looking for some highlights, all three of us are now above 500. I'm one game above. Proppy is 4 games above. Dave is 2 games above. But here's the thing. You go in peaks and valleys, as we know, in this sports betting game. And do you really want to miss out when Proppy and Dave go on their next run? We saw Dave go, 0-4 in week 1 and then win 10 of his next, 12, something like that earlier in the year? You don't want to miss it. And that is why we pay attention every week. All right, time to bring in the stars of the show. We have one of the best prop bettors on the planet who once again is number one on SportsLine's NBA standings. Should we be surprised? The one and only Propstarz. And we have the Fantasy Hall of Famer, the guy who's every week I'm looking at before setting my 11 lineups for fantasy football. It is the one, the only Dave Richard from CBS Sports. Uncle Dave, we're going to start with you. You know, when you came on and you and I were talking before the show, you were fired up this week. Not happy. Why?
You saw how I did last week. And honestly, the weeks before I was around 500. And, listen, I like my process and I don't like the results. And it just makes me more fierce about the process when the results aren't what I want. And so here's the deal I'm going to make with everybody watching. You guys watching, continue to just hear what we have to say. If what we say makes sense to you, go for it. Place a wager that you're comfortable with on our bet. If it doesn't make sense to you, then don't do it. You don't have to do it just because one of us says it. The other thing I'm going to do, and this is my promise to you guys, is I'm going to scale back what I look at for player props. You will not see very many player props from me this week. You will also see zero, Z-E-R-O, wide receiver or tight end player props. I focus solely on quarterback attempts, quarterback completions, running back attempts, running back yards. I did consider a combo play. I didn't take it. But I thought that if I scale back what I look at, I can focus more on the ones that really stood out to me. And I don't have to give 5 or 6 every week. And this week I'm going to only give 3. And if I go 0-3, then it sucks for me. But at least you know that I'm honing in on my process. I said honing, right? Honing in on my process so that I can deliver some better results and that you guys are smart about where you decide to put your money.
I'm sold. All right, Proppy, go for it.
Yeah, I think Dave brought up an interesting point. When we're talking about player props, it's such a massive surface area. If we're talking about the prop landscape, it's easy to be overwhelmed with just how many props are available. There's so many categories. There's constantly evolving markets, new markets entering as well. So I think Dave choosing to kind of focus more on categories that he's had previous success in and is very comfortable is a good piece of advice and just lesson for the fellow bettors out there. If you're ever struggling, just kind of getting back to basics, focusing on the categories that you feel most comfortable in and have had success, I think is a really worthwhile perspective from Dave.
All right, well, it's game time. Let's get right to it, Proppy. We're going to start with you. We're going to start with a wide receiver prop. So Green Bay has beaten Chicago in 15 of the last 16 meetings. Uncle Dave probably doesn't want to hear that, being that he's from the city of Chicago. I don't know. Are you a Bears fan?
Bears fan.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Nonetheless, as a Packer fan, I love this stat. And Proppy, Jaden Reed is a key contributor for Green Bay, but not necessarily this week. Why not?
Yeah, we're going to fade Jaden Reed this week, gentlemen. I'm going under 54.5 receiving yards. There's a couple different numbers out there. I'm comfortable playing this one down to 52.5 here. But looking at Jaden Reed, if we just look at his win versus loss splits, they're incredibly drastic. He's averaging 130 receiving yards per game in the 3 losses that Green Bay's had, compared to just 38 receiving yards per game in the Green Bay victories. So that's pretty significant here, considering Green Bay being 5.5 points against this Bears team that just appears to be in complete disarray. Also, if we look at the Bears, the strength of their defense is their pass defense. They're first in EPA allowed per dropback, so they're a very good pass defense. They're also a bit of a run funnel as well. So teams are opting in neutral game environments or game scripts to run pretty heavily. So as a result, I think we're going to see Green Bay lean heavily on Josh Jacobs. His rushing line is set at 74.5, which is high for him, but obviously the odds makers are anticipating a run-heavy game plan and probably minimal passing volume from Jordan Love. And Jaden Reed he has middling route participation and target share. While he is a good receiver and probably their most explosive dynamic weapon, he doesn't have a wide receiver one target share, and he's not running more than 75% of the dropbacks of Jordan Love here. So he's really not on the field as much as you would expect for a guy of his caliber here. So I think if you couple all these factors together, it's a good spot to fade him. I'm going to go under 54.5 receiving yards for Reed.
Uncle Dave, I was looking at your fantasy rankings. You have Jaden Reed 29th. And this line has already dropped in some places to 50.5. What are your thoughts on this one, and how low personally would you go on Proppy's prop?
I wouldn't touch it. I think that Jaden Reed has really proven to be a boom or bust wide receiver who doesn't get the work that, frankly, I think he deserves. I love the talent. I think that he's an outstanding receiver who should be getting in the neighborhood of minimum 6 targets per week, along with a carry or 2 on top of that. In the fantasy world, his big games have been anchored by big plays. And I know Chicago's pass defense is good, and they don't give up a lot of big plays. But I know that this Packers offense could always pop off at any time. And Reed, despite him not having the highest route participation on the team, does tend to play in a majority of snaps for them. So while I recognize where Proppy's coming from, and I think the under is probably the way I would go if I had to pick a side on it, I personally would stay away.
Fair enough. All right, Proppy, I want to go to another under that you have. Kyle Pitts of the Falcons going up against the Denver defense, who last year was terrible. This year, actually pretty darn good. And now Atlanta's going to Denver on Sunday. Are we liking Kyle Pitts, or are we going away from Kyle Pitts?
I'm fading Kyle Pitts, and I say this as a Kyle Pitts truther. Throughout Kyle Pitts' career, I've been someone who's backed Kyle Pitts, but there's just too many red flags here. First and foremost, a 7% first read target rate. That is extremely concerning for a player of his caliber, and signals he is just not a part of the game plan. He is not a focal point and a consistent option in Atlanta's passing attack. That's just the truth of the matter, and that's why we just see really inconsistent targets for Kyle Pitts. Then we also look at the matchup against Denver. Top 5 in EPA per dropback, top 5 in defensive success rating against the pass as well. And Kyle Pitts, frankly, is just not getting targeted like a player of his caliber you would think he would. So I just think he's a very talented player for whatever reason. Myriad of issues. We could have an entire show dedicated to Kyle Pitts as to why he's not receiving the targets, but I just think he's a good fade at this present time, considering his role in the offense and his inability to draw targets when on the field. And that's plagued him outside of his rookie season throughout the majority of his career now.
I don't think anybody wants to have a whole show as to why to fade Kyle Pitts.
I would love a whole show about Kyle Pitts.
Would Uncle Dave, would you want to contribute in the Kyle Pitts fade program?
Well, I faded him in fantasy, and it has not quite worked out for me because he's averaging just over 10 PPR points per game. I just went back and looked. 4 of his last 6 games, at least 10 PPR points, but not in each of his past 2. And the thing that stood out to me about what Prop said was the low percentage of first read targets. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the receivers that Atlanta has, and really just how Darnell Mooney has turned out to be just a pleasant surprise for the Atlanta Falcons. But B, just the fact that he's never really been this breakout sensation, and that even the Kyle Pitts truthers would admit that maybe he's not going to be this dominant tight end like he was drafted to be. Remember, once upon a time, a former top 10 pick. I don't mind where Proppy's coming from on this one. And this is an example of me not tooling around with props that normally, and maybe when I'm rolling, I would. But there's 2 Falcons props that I definitely would take the under on. And these are unofficial plays, by the way.
Mhm.
And it's longest reception. And I just think that Denver, the way that they choose to play defense, I think it works against both Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Both of them. London is at under 20.5. I've seen on a book. Kyle Pitts under 19.5 for longest reception. I don't think that Kirk Cousins, A, is going to be comfortable in the pocket, and B, is going to be able to have deep throws available to him to either of these guys. And so I would look in that direction. And, the problem is you got to wait 4 quarters to see that one hit. But I don't think either London nor Pitts will have a big reception in the game against Denver.
That is fair. And our friend Sia Najad, the great handicapper Sia Najad in the chat, he says Denver rolls. I don't know about rolls, but I have them as, fairly close-ish. So good to have Sia in here. If you have any questions for him, by all means, give him a heads up, and always glad to have him here. All right, I want to share a play here before we get back to prop and then Uncle Dave, I promise we're going to get to you when we get to running back and passing props. The first note that I have under this prop of Cedric Tillman over 56.5 receiving yards for the Browns is Uncle Dave ranks him 21st in your fantasy football rankings at CBS Sports. And actually, you are the lowest of the three of the three of you, and you have him at 21st. And it's Cedric Tillman. We're like, who was this guy? If I had asked you guys in the chat a month ago, I said, what team is Cedric Tillman on? Maybe a third of you would have gotten it, if that. Uncle Dave knows, Proppy knows. I think I would have known. But he's been pretty hot since week 7, 22% target share, 27% first read share. In the 3 games without Amari Cooper, 81, 99, and 75 yards. And by the way, New Orleans allows the 4th most yards per game to wide receivers. I think he's going to have a nice day. Remember, this is the Jameis Winston revenge game in New Orleans. So I expect Jameis to be throwing, chucking and ducking, as I like to say. Uncle Dave, are you with me on Cedric Tillman this week?
Man, I'm starting to think I'm coming off as like Debbie Downer here on the show because I'm not rallying behind my guys, and I love you guys. So Don't take it personal. Something smells fishy about this line. Why in the world would it be this low? And you mentioned that this is the revenge game for Jameis Winston. I want you to look at my rankings, and you can share it with people if you want. Where do I have Jameis Winston ranked? If this were such an important revenge game for Jameis Winston, you'd certainly think I'd have him higher. He spent 4 years in New Orleans. That coaching staff, a lot of guys are still there who were around Jameis when he was there, including Jameis was there last year. It makes me think that they might know how to defend Jameis Winston, and I wonder if the odds makers are kind of getting ahead of it here. All that being said, I think the number is low enough where you could take the over, and we can both be right here. Okay. Tillman doesn't have a monster game, but he certainly gets in the neighborhood between 60 and 65 yards. I certainly wouldn't want to play this one if the number was 61.5, 62.5, but something just smells fishy to me in those rankings, their PPR rankings. I think he's still going to get good targets and good numbers, but I also think he's got a chance to score. But when everything lines up, a high volume wide receiver, favorable matchup, quarterback who likes to sling it, man, this number should be minimum 67.5.
Right.
Not. And it makes me nervous because Proppy says it all the time, every year. As the season goes on, the odds makers get sharper. And this is one that just smells fishy to me. I'm sorry. I can't say I absolutely love it and want to smash the over on this one. But don't worry, there are props from each of you. I've looked at the rundown that I absolutely do love and will get on board with myself.
All right, fair enough. Now we'll see if you like this one from Proppy. Now this is a really low line from a player that you played the other week in Europe, Proppy, Demario Douglas. And he got hurt. And so he missed, he got hurt early in that game, but he was getting targeted early. What do we feel about Demario this week going up against the Rams secondary?
We like him to go over 34.5 receiving yards, EC. I'm going back to the well. Demario let us down in that last game, unfortunately, was sick. I believe had the flu in London and did not show up as a questionable tag prior to the game, unfortunately, and he was unable to even stand, I think, the prior evening to the game. So should have never suited up. However, not afraid to go right back to the proverbial well with Demario Douglas here. Coming off, I think we're getting a little discount on this line because last week he had a season low 62% route participation. I'm throwing out the game where he had the illness in London. And that's largely because the Patriots deployed a lot of heavy personnel. What I mean by that is a lot of 2 tight end sets. The Patriots were winning in that football game wire to wire against Chicago. And as a result, we saw them run the football. And when you run the football, you tend to use a lot of heavy personnel. And he's a slot receiver. So they just did not utilize a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, which tells me why the route participation was low. That's not likely to be the case against a Rams team who are 4.5-point favorites against the Patriots. Also, this Rams pass defense is not very good at all. They're 22nd in EPA per dropback, 30th in PFF's coverage grade. I expect the Patriots to air the ball out in definitely what is a solid matchup. And I like Demario Douglas. When he's on the field, he's a target drawer, which bodes very well for him. So I expect that route participation to climb up towards closer to 80%. Love the fact we're getting a discount here. Whenever this guy's on the field, he's managed to be productive. And I do expect the Patriots to utilize plenty of 3 wide receiver sets and to be playing from behind. So Demario Douglas should get enough looks, in my opinion. And I love his nickname of Pop as well. So Pop goes the Douglas over 33.5 receiving yards, gentlemen.
And if you're in the chat, you'll see that Sia Najad likes Keyshawn Boutte over 31.5 receiving yards as well. So if you feel like you want to take a shot in this Patriots-Rams game, have a little bit of fun with it, Sia's got to play, Proppy's got to play, Uncle Dave's got rankings, and he's got some leans, I'm sure. So we'll roll with that. Hey, I want to tell you guys something before we hit our first break. Have you guys checked out, if you're SportsLine members, the SportsLine Discord, which launched on Monday? Uncle Dave, you probably haven't seen it yet. Proppy, I know you've been in there. People are calling for you. We had a few people say the best show of the week coming up here at 5 Eastern, and thank you to those people. Check that out, SportsLine Discord. If you are a member and you want to sign up, go to the SportsLine homepage and check out Discord, or go to discord.gg/SportsLine and check that out as well. Also, if you are not a member and you want to be a part of this great community, DM me on X. I'll take care of you, and I'll give you the best code that we can find. Just DM me at Cohen's Corner AZ. All right, coming up next, Uncle Dave is going to check into the party, and we're going to give some running back props after we hear from one of our sponsors. It is college football time. I'll be driving down 2 hours to a game tonight to watch it. I probably watch my team lose for the 6th straight week. But hey, we love football. It's football season. Who needs sleep? This is what we do. Uncle Dave, speaking of people who don't need sleep, Uncle Dave, you are somebody that works your tail off all the time, but especially during football season. And now it's time for some running back props. We're going to start with Jonathan Taylor. How do we feel about him playing against the Jets, whose defense can be hit or miss?
I absolutely love it. I'm going to take the over on his rushing yards. It's a big number. It's 81.5. And I think he can get there. In fact, he's been over it in 2 of his past 3 games. He's had 88 or more rush yards in 5 of 7 games this year. 2 games where he had 16 or fewer carries, he didn't go over. One of them was week 1. That was with Anthony Richardson against the Houston Texans. Let me tell you about this New York Jets defense. You probably already watched them. EC, I know you did because they took on the Cardinals last week. And while no Arizona running back had over 82 rush yards against them, they certainly did a number combined against the Jets, both on the ground and through the air. 4.3 yards per carry allowed in their past 5. And that number is actually weighed down by what the Patriots did. That lowly New England run game was terrible against the Jets. Every other run game against them in the past 5 has done great. So if you get rid of that Patriots, the number rises to 4.7 yards per carry and at least 97 yards to a running back in 3 of those 4 games. Even Najee Harris had over 100 yards against them a few weeks ago. They've also missed 39 tackles on runs in their past 5. What do you think's going to happen when they miss a tackle on Jonathan Taylor on Sunday? I mean, he that house calls are absolutely in play. And I think the Colts' decision to go back to Anthony Richardson puts them in a mode where they run first and run often. You certainly don't want to give Anthony Richardson the ball and have him drop back to throw 35 times a game. And I know Richardson's going to get his carries too, but this is just a matchup where they can lean on Jonathan Taylor, wear down that Jets defense, and eventually break through. Honestly, they've been doing some screwy things with their defense ever since they fired Robert Saleh, and it hasn't worked for them. Jeff Ulbrich came out this week and said, we're going to get back to basics on tackling. Yeah, good luck with that against Jonathan Taylor. We're going over 81.5 rushing yards at -117.
And Sia loves your play in the chat as well, Uncle Dave. He's going to make it an official play as well. So when Sia and Uncle Dave agree, you know what to do. Proppy, your last play of the week here is also an over. Now, we talked about the Browns game, and Uncle Dave has Jameis ranked 18th in his fantasy football rankings this week. But one guy we didn't talk about was Nick Chubb on the ground. So if Jameis isn't going to maybe throw it as much as he should, does this mean we might have more of a Nick Chubb game, in your opinion?
I mean, frankly, Jameis can have a big game, and Nick Chubb only needs 60.5 rushing yards, which is a very low number for Nick Chubb, who hasn't looked like Nick Chubb since returning from injury. But I think a lot of that can be chalked up to just getting back onto the field, shaking off the rust. Then if we look at the prior 2 matchups, they came against Baltimore and the Chargers. What do those defenses have in common? Both of them are elite rush defenses, both top 3 in EPA allowed per rush. Also, I was encouraged. Nick Chubb had 15 carries and 16 carries, so pretty significant workloads. And then he had the bye week to really get healthy. And then we have a much softer matchup against New Orleans, who arguably has the worst rush defense in the NFL right now. 30th in EPA allowed per rush, 31st in defensive success rate against the rush. So can't ask for a better matchup. I anticipate Nick Chubb getting 15 to 16 carries at minimum, as long as the game is competitive, which it's projected to be. This just looks like a really good bounce back spot for Nick Chubb. Having that bye week, I think, will do him wonders as well. I think we see a more vintage performance from Nick Chubb. This is a spot I actually like laddering as well. I think the upside is potentially triple digits, but I do really like him to go over at least 61 yards in the process.
All right, we didn't get the normal proppy buzzwords of explosion and, boom, stuff. Yeah, what's that one, Dave?
Nuclear.
Yeah, we didn't get a nuclear, but we got the term ladder, which makes me pay your eyes and your ears open when you hear Proppy use the word ladder or nuclear. So remember, Nick Chubb on Sunday, get that line in while you can. Now, a player, Dave, that you are not going to be laddering, I don't think, is Najee Harris.
No way. I don't know if I can ladder in reverse, but I'd consider it. I'm taking the under on Najee's rush yards, and it's with an interesting caveat. I don't want you to make this bet yet. Right now, the line is at 51.5 at -117. There's a chance this number could go up because Jaylen Warren is questionable for the game. The backfield mate with Najee Harris is Jaylen Warren. Hurt himself in practice this week, listed as questionable. But as the line even stands right now, I think the over is a sucker bet because he's blasted past this prop line in 7 of 9 games this year. Why would it be this much lower? Well, obviously, the matchup is definitely not in his favor. He's going up against Baltimore. This is the top-ranked run defense in the National Football League. They are number 1 in yards per carry against running backs, number 1 in yards per game against running backs. They do not allow a lot of rushing yards. They are stout up front. They did a great job against Chase Brown last week on the ground, and now they've got Najee Harris, who is a bigger, slower target than Chase Brown. He's had over 100 yards against Baltimore in 2 career meetings, including their last meeting. That was in week 18 of 2023. Both those games where he had over 100 yards were late season meetings where the Ravens either did not have or did not wish to play Lamar Jackson. That changed the whole tenor of the game script. So you just go ahead and throw out those games, and it's 3 of 4 in Najee's career where he's been under 51.5. As for the running backs against Baltimore with at least 52 rush yards, I'm going to run down the whole list for you. Nick Chubb. Okay, that's the list. That's it. No other running back this year has had more than 52 rush yards against these Ravens, and other than Nick Chubb, of course. And I don't think Najee is going to be next on this list. So I'm thinking we wait on this one. If Jaylen Warren is active, the number's not going to change very much. Okay, fine. I'll still take the under. If Jaylen Warren is out, I would expect that line to steam up a little bit. And once it gets to, I don't even know, man, like 54, 55.5, hammer the under on it. Because I don't think Najee Harris is going to do very well. And I think the Steelers might even know it. And I think the odds makers know it too. This is going to be a game where Russell Wilson will have the ball in his hands a lot. Under 51.5 rush yards or more for Najee Harris at -117.
And by the way, I just want to point out that line is off some of the books right now because of Warren's status. So that should come back on later this week. Go ahead, Proppy.
I like that play quite a bit from Dave so far. My favorite prop that Dave has mentioned, definitely endorsed that. A prop I did want to mention while we talk about this game, and Dave alluded to Russell Wilson having to throw the football here, that I like. And this is not typically a category that I often play. And I want to shout out my buddy Dan, who I know is going to be listening or watching, for mentioning this to me. Is Russell Wilson to throw an interception in this game against Baltimore? Because Baltimore is a significant pass funnel as a result of the strength of their run defense. And also it's twofold because the pass defense is significantly weaker. But so I do anticipate Russell Wilson likely trailing from playing from behind, having to air the ball out a lot. Russell Wilson, while playing well, puts up a lot of 50-50 balls and a lot of potentially balls that can get picked off. This is close to even odds, which I love as well. Marlon Humphrey, I don't know exactly. I'm pretty sure he leads the NFL in interceptions as well. Plenty of playmakers. I know Kyle Hamilton is unlikely to play, but
he's going to play. They're saying he's like more likely to play now.
Oh, interesting.
I know he practiced on Thursday. Yeah.
Okay, so that bodes even better considering the caliber of playmaker that he is. So, no shortage of playmakers in that Baltimore secondary. I think Russell Wilson's going to throw a pick here. So, love this spot. Shout out to my buddy Dan for pointing it out to me as well.
And I have a Russell Wilson prop later in the show, Proppy. Go ahead, Dave.
He had an interception last week on a deep heave to Pickens. It was just too far in front of Pickens, and it was ugly. And there was another pass that could have been intercepted, but wasn't. It was out front, and it was over the middle of the field too, not one of those moon balls. He lives and dies with those deep throws. The placement on them is generally very good, and he's got the types of receivers who can make plays on them. But you're absolutely right. This is a good call by mysterious Dan, friend of Cheese and Properoni over there, to go and when you've got odds that are low juice rather on an interception prop like this, I dig it. I like that one.
So I love the word parlay, as you all know, Proppy's shuddering when I say that. But I have a prop later in the show for Russell Wilson. We have Dave's under, and we have Dan's, now Proppy's, interception for Russell Wilson. Now that, to me, makes a great same-game parlay. Just want to point that out. And you can bet that at BetMGM. We'll talk more about them here shortly. But I want to give a prop that I know Dave loves here, and it's Devon Achane over 101.5 rushing plus receiving yards. And I'm making this a 1.5 unit play. I am playing this up to 110 yards here because Achane has 100 or more total yards in 4 of 5 Tagovailoa starts. He missed on Monday Night Football, but in each of those 5 games, he has at least 16 touches. The Raiders have given up 100 or more total yards to a running back 5 times in 9 games this season. And another thing that Achane goes his way, Tua throws to him a lot. And he runs the second most routes from the slot of running backs, and the Raiders are the worst against slot receivers. Achane should have plenty of work. In fact, Dave, I always like to look at, after I make my picks, and I'll go and you have Achane number 2 this week in your fantasy rankings. Why are you so bullish on this prop?
Because he is absolutely in play to make splash plays both on the ground and through the air. This is a Raiders defense that has struggled against the run for the majority of the season. And those targets that he gets, he's not running 10-yard dig routes or wheel routes very often. These are little short throws. They're like extensions of the run game. They're great for fantasy because they add up points because you get points for the catch in most fantasy leagues. But he also can turn any play into a monster play. And I love his chances of getting, 16, 17 touches in this game and weaving his way into 130 total yards. I don't know if you can ladder total yardage, but if you could, I would do it with Achane. I think he has a huge game. And the best part about Achane, at least from the Dolphins' perspective, is he takes pressure off of everyone else in the offense. So Tua doesn't get hit as much. Tyreek with his wrist doesn't have to do a lot of crazy things. Jalen Waddle is as healthy as a horse, and for whatever reason, they just don't love throwing to him. I don't know why it bothers me for fantasy purposes and real life purposes. He's good. He should get the ball more, but they don't give it to him. They give it to Achane. He's the one that's the genesis of their offense right now.
Boy, what a bust Tyreek Hill is this year for fantasy purposes. I mean, not all his fault, but it's true.
Without question, he wasn't going to be very good without Tua. And since Tua's come back, if you've watched their games, I don't know if this is official or not, but it feels like maybe 60% of his throws are out in a second and a half. Okay. Schemed up, predetermined throws, and they're short. And not a lot of them go to Tyreek or Waddle. It's weird. And if they had a better offensive line, maybe they'd be more comfortable letting Tua drop back and throw it. There was times in the second half against Buffalo 2 games ago where Tua took more time to throw, and the offense looked great. It looked like it did last year. I don't know exactly what's going on. Part of it could be that McDaniels fears that his offense has been figured out a little bit. But Tyreek, between the wrist and Tua not throwing longer than like 6 yards downfield, it's kind of put the whammy on his fantasy production.
Proppy, you were going to add to this.
That is certainly by design. Miami getting rid of the ball quickly, Tua getting the ball out very quickly. And against the Raiders, who I do like this play as well, who have given up a ton of big plays, are super vulnerable defensively, but they also generate pressure quickly, which bodes well for his involvement in the short area passing game. So I expect Tua to continue to get rid of the ball quickly, and I do think it's twofold, partly to protect him as well as it being an extension of the run game. So I do think that's a good look as well.
And Lori in the chat notes that an Achane total of 125 or more combined yards is plus 170 on one of the sports books. So just look around for that. You can find that. Proppy, I want to ask you here in the chat, Big Cheesy and Fishbowl Flash ask about Kareem Hunt and his rushing yards, 64.5. Do you just have a lean on which way you would play Hunt?
To me, it's an efficient line. Just at this stage of Kareem Hunt, I'm just not seeing a lot of upside that I'd potentially look for. I think Kareem Hunt, while he got off to the good start and obviously is playing in a good offense, getting valuable high leverage touches, I just think that it's more of a middling option. So I slightly to the over, just not something I'm going to run to play personally.
All right. Now, I want to segue to passing props, and this is an Uncle Dave specialty because we like to talk about completions. And you're big on attempts and completions. You're getting back to basics this week. We're going to start with a guy who's playing pretty darn well and has turned into a legitimate fantasy football QB1, at least on the border, QB1, QB2, and that's Bo Nix in Denver.
Yeah, and I like the idea of taking the over on his completions. I saw the number at 19.5 at minus 115, and I jumped on it. And it really has to do with the combination of how he prefers to play and the matchup that he has this week. Atlanta plays zone-heavy coverage pretty reliably. That makes it easy for quarterbacks to hit short throws. In fact, the Falcons allow a 76.4% completion rate on the season of passes of 10 or fewer air yards. That's 5th highest in the NFL, by the way. That's Nix's bread and butter, man. He's 9th in completion rate on throws of 10 or fewer air yards and 11th in attempts per game at 22.6. In fact, he's completed 17.1 passes of 10 or fewer air yards on average this season. So either he throws a few more passes of 10 or fewer air yards, or maybe he hits some downfield throws. We saw him do that last week with Cortland Sutton for a long touchdown. and he gets over this mark against Atlanta. It's a prop line that 6 of the past 9 quarterbacks have hit against the Falcons. And here's the last thing. 2 of the Falcons' top 3 cornerbacks, 2 of their starters, are out for this game. There's no Mike Hughes. There's no D. Alford. It's not their best cornerback. A.J. Terrell is that. But these other 2 guys are out. One of the other backups, out. So there's going to be some serious targeting going on against those inexperienced cornerbacks that the Falcons will put on the field against Denver. I think the Broncos take advantage of it. This is my favorite prop of the week. Bo Nix over 19.5 completions at -115.
Dave, what do you think of Audric Estime getting more of a run in that Denver backfield? Do you expect to see him be the guy? Is he a guy maybe that Bo Nix can dump it off to in the short passing game?
I don't know how many chances there will be for him to do that because he tends to play on rushing downs only. I watched his film from last week. He was a willing pass blocker, but he didn't really get tested. He didn't really have that many opportunities. And when he did leave the backfield and ran a route, they were very, very short routes. He would turn around after running about 3 yards, and he wouldn't get the target. He wasn't known for that at Notre Dame. I think he had like 27 catches over 3 years at Notre Dame. So I wouldn't count on him for that. But in this matchup against Atlanta, yes, I do think he will lead Atlanta in carries and rushing yards. I think he's got a shot to score too. He is a physical running back who can really pound through even a small lane. He can squeeze through those tight holes and come through with some good numbers that way. I considered the over on his rushing yardage, and I considered the over on his rush attempts. But this was my favorite prop in the game was Bo Nix over 19.5 completions.
Fair enough. And I will give my one passing prop of the week. We talked about him earlier, Russell Wilson. And this line is very, very fishy to me. I'm going to make it a 1.5 unit play because I just think it's a bad line. Russell Wilson over 225.5 passing yards. As Proppy mentioned, I think that Baltimore will be ahead and Pittsburgh will be in chase mode. But quarterbacks have thrown for 269 or more yards in 8 of 10 games against the Ravens. Wilson in his first 2 starts had 264 and 278. He's third in yards per attempt, has the third highest ADOT and second highest deep ball rate. And plus, as I mentioned, that chase mode, that interception that Proppy talked about earlier for Russell Wilson, I could definitely see it. So I'm making this a 1.5 unit play over 225.5 for Russell Wilson. Now, Dave, you're giving me a look here. Why are you giving me the trap line look for Russell Wilson?
Because it feels like a trap line.
I'm taking it.
Why? In his first 2 starts, he threw for over 250 yards, way more than 250 yards in both. And then last week, he completed half his throws against Washington for 195 yards. I am nervous that the odds makers see something in what is so clearly a favorable matchup as far as on paper goes between Russell Wilson and the Steelers. Why would they make the line this low? And this is just like the Tillman line. I feel the exact same way. It wouldn't surprise me if Russell Wilson finished the game with 235 yards and he just barely goes over. Okay. It also wouldn't surprise me if he has 300 yards either. This Ravens pass defense isn't very good, but there's something about the way that he played last week. It might just be the fact that, there were a lot of plays where he was pressured by Washington and he just got rid of that ball quickly. And it just brought me back to his last 2 years in Denver. It could be something like that, where he might have 28, 30, 33 attempts, somewhere in that range, but there's 5 or 6 of them that just end up being throwaways, and that hammers down the ceiling for Russell Wilson. But there's something going on here that makes me nervous to take the over. I hope you're right on this one, too. I'm starting him in a couple of my fantasy leagues, but it's because I don't have a better option.
Yeah, you traded a pick to get him, I believe, in one of our dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I was desperate for a quarterback. This was before Anthony Richardson was named the starter again. If I had known that Richardson was going to be named the starter, I probably would have taken my lumps and kept my 3rd-round pick for Russ.
And you traded with Josh Nagel of SportsLine fame, who then shipped your pick to me for Juwan Jennings. So, Uncle Dave, I need to root against you because I need that 3rd-round pick in next year's Dynasty League fantasy draft to be higher. So whoever's playing Uncle Dave this week, well, sorry, Uncle Dave, just, I need your pick to be higher. So that's where I'm going with it. Proppy, just your thoughts on Russell Wilson in this play here.
It's an interesting spot. I think the Ravens' pass defense, frankly, is a little bit better than some of the statistics reflect. And that is largely why this line is as low as it is, coupled with the fact that he's playing above his head, above expectations. And I do think that he's likely a regression candidate as well in the yardage department. So a combination of the defense being a little bit better, not being the same matchup that they were early on in the year, and Russell Wilson being a regression candidate.
All right. Well, a lot of you like to play the first touchdown bets, and we do the gems on the primetime shows. But BetMGM has a really cool offer if you're not familiar with it. If your first touchdown bet doesn't hit, but you have the second touchdown, you can win with BetMGM's Pro Football Second Chance. We've all had our first touchdown bet called back before, and BetMGM is giving you a second chance. With BetMGM's Pro Football Second Chance, place any first touchdown score bet, and if your player doesn't score first but scores second, get your entire stake back in cash, no opt-in required. Here's how it works. Place a pregame straight first touchdown score bet in any NFL game. If your player scores the first touchdown in the game, great, you win your wager as normal. If they score the second touchdown in the game, you'll get your stake back in cash. It's that simple. Log into BetMGM for more details. Coming up next, I have a kicker prop, plus we'll review what we have on the show after we hear from one of our sponsors.
It's a team almost too good to be true.
You guys ain't ready for us.
Kick your game day off right as the Tops team tackles all the biggest headlines around the league.
Who's got two thumbs and loves this next segment?
Sunday mornings on CBS Sports Network.
I want to give a shout out to Glenn in the Discord chat. I know he watches this show often, but he asked me, he says, do you have a kicker prop that you're giving out on the show today? I said, of course I do. What would a Friday show be, a prop show be, if I did not have a kicker prop? Matt Gay, over 1.5 field goals, is minus 125. I got this at BetMGM. He has 7 straight games of 2 or more made field goals. Teams have attempted multiple field goals against the Jets in 6 of 10, but we have great weather in the Meadowlands this weekend. There's no rain. There's light wind. Matt Gay is going to make it 8 in a row. Sometimes you got to ride the hot streak. I did it last week, and I'm going right back to it. One thing, if you watch this show often, you'll see we find players and lines, and you just got to go with it. That's what we're doing here. That's our kicker prop of the week. I've hit the Titans, facing the Titans plenty, and now we're rolling with this. If it happens, guess what the kicker prop is going to be next week? It'll be Matt Gay again if the Colts are not on bye. Nonetheless, we're going with that at minus 125. All right, let's recap what we have on the show and then have Dave and Proppy make their favorites. Proppy has 4 picks here. Nick Chubb over 60.5 rushing yards, at minus 115, a spot that he likes to ladder. Jaden Reed under 54.5 receiving yards at minus 115. Demario Douglas over 33.5 receiving yards at minus 111. Kyle Pitts under 43.5 receiving yards at minus 115. Uncle Dave is on Bo Nix over 19.5 completions, minus 115. Jonathan Taylor over 81.5 rushing yards, minus 117. And Najee Harris, this one may not be out on all books, but look for it, especially if it goes higher this week, under 51.5 rushing yards at minus 117. Dave loves that under. I'm on Russell Wilson over 225.5 passing yards. Devon Achane over 1.5 rushing and receiving yards at minus 115. Both of those last 2 plays are for 1.5 units. Cedric Tillman over 56.5 receiving yards, minus 110. Matt Gay over 1.5 made field goals at minus 125. All right, Uncle Dave, what is your favorite play of Propstarz this week?
I think it's the Nick Chubb one. Over 60.5 rushing yards. There have been 8 running backs this season with at least 14 carries against the New Orleans Saints. All of them have scored. 6 of them have had at least 80 rushing yards. If you buy into the idea that Nick Chubb took his time to just rest and chill out, you could almost kind of put the pieces together that, all right, he had a ramp-up period before he started to play, and then he played in 3 football games. And maybe that was his training camp, all right, or the equivalent to what a training camp is to an NFL player. 5-6 weeks of getting ready. Now he had his week off. He comes out firing against a depleted and not good New Orleans Saints run defense.
Proppy, your favorite of Uncle Dave's 3 plays. What would you choose?
I really like Najee Harris fade against Baltimore. I just think this Baltimore run defense is elite. I think Dave made a great point. Just Najee's style of running just does not bode well for him against Baltimore, who is extremely stout up front. And they're definitely a defense that will remember getting gashed for 100 yards by him for sure. So these games are always tight defensive battles, and I expect him to just be met in the backfield quite a few times, and I think it's a really good spot to fade him.
All right, I just got a couple more, and then we'll get going here. Uncle Dave, your thoughts? Christian McCaffrey this week. Somebody brought him up in the chat. Did not score last week. Scored, I think, in all but 3 games last season. Will McCaffrey get on the board, and would you play him potentially for multiple touchdowns against Seattle?
Yes to 1 touchdown. I'm going to say no to multiple touchdowns against Seattle. I was encouraged by what I saw from him last week. He did look like the CMC of old. Big explosiveness on his runs, had the big catch and run in the game, and Seattle's run defense is terrible. And the best part about last week, guys, he played almost 90% of the snaps for the 49ers. So they really did not treat him with kid gloves. They just pushed him right back onto the field and said, do your thing, CMC. And CMC was like, all right, cool. I'm going to go do my thing then. And he did. I think the rushing efficiency will improve, and I think he can find the end zone 1 time against the Niners. Against the
Fair enough. Fair enough. Proppy, last one for you, and it's not a football question here, but Hef brought it up in the chat. We got to talk about it. Mike Tyson or Jake Paul? You're in the casino. Are you going to bet it?
I've already bet it, and this pains me as a lifelong fan of Mike Tyson. I grew up watching Mike Tyson, idolizing Mike Tyson, huge fan of Mike Tyson, but Mike Tyson's going to get hurt. I'll explain why. First and foremost, he's freaking 58. He's older than Uncle Dave. So imagine what Uncle Dave would look like in a boxing ring. But look at Evander Holyfield, okay? The guy that Mike Tyson's ear that he bought that was outclassing Mike Tyson 20-something years ago. Evander Holyfield at age 58, 1 year ago, fought in a boxing match against Vitor Belfort, a former MMA fighter, making his 2nd or 3rd boxing match. And he also hasn't been smoking weed and taking DMT and ayahuasca for the past 20 years like Mike Tyson has. Evander Holyfield was still in exceptional shape. He did not even look like he should have lasted 30 seconds. He was stumbling, just did not look good. He looked like a senior citizen in the ring, just falling over, 1 shot. I think it's going to be a violent massacre. I think we're going to see Jake Paul, as much as I dislike him, absolutely starch Mike Tyson if this is a legitimate fight and there's not some preconceived arrangement between the two of them. So if this is a real fight, Mike Tyson's going to get really hurt. He should not be in the ring at this age. Yes, he still has the power, but he does not have the stamina, and he cannot take a shot at this age. So unfortunately, I've had a heavy position on Jake Paul winning by KO or TKO at plus 140. I would gladly eat crow here, and if I lose this bet, I'll be very happy. So it's almost like hedging for me as far as I'm concerned.
If you lose the bet, will you do a belly flop on the bed behind you?
Of course.
Okay, good, because we all want to see that.
I'll let the hair down and do a belly flop.
I love. Now I'm absolutely rooting crazy for Mike Tyson. There was an interview Tyson did this week where he eloquently pointed out to his young journalist how he doesn't believe in legacy and he doesn't necessarily care about his legacy, and that when you pass away, that's just kind of it. That's the way it goes. That's kind of the vibe that I got. He spoke very eloquently in the interview. You can find it on social media. Point being, this is a great cash grab for Mike Tyson.
I was going to say 20 million reasons not to care about your legacy.
Yeah, right. To go in the ring with Jake Paul. And look, I don't know how Jake Paul will win. I'm hoping it's with like the softest knockout punch ever, and Mike just rolls out of the ring and he collects his paycheck, and we all just enjoy what it is, the spectacle of this fight. But I agree with you. I think that this is going to be a Jake Paul victory over.
Unfortunately,
and it hurts. It hurts because this is our guy from our generation.
Yeah,
and
the
younger generation coming to knock him out.
This was the baddest man on the planet. If Mike Tyson was anywhere close to his physical prime, he would absolutely wipe the floor with Jake Paul. But I have this nightmare scenario I can't stop seeing or visualizing, and that's Mike Tyson's lifeless corpse with Jake Paul celebrating and screaming over his body. So
We don't want him to die. Let's not.
We don't want that.
Far. Man, how down is still going to get, EC?
You never know what you're going to get on the Friday prop show. Hey, I got something for you guys, too. We got a double University of Arizona action. We got basketball at Wisconsin. We got football at home against Houston, where I'm heading right after the show. Stay away from the football game. Bet the basketball team at -3.5. You will not regret it.
And I'm fading your guy as well, so that's some triple Arizona
action. And you're fading. Look, if you look at the site, Proppy is fading a U of A player in the NBA. I won't say who it is. You'll have to be a SportsLine subscriber to check that out. Hey, want to thank Debo for substituting, being our producer this week with Jake off. For Uncle Dave and Proppy, I am EC. And as I always like to say, let's hit it big.
Big!
Good luck.